So for a neurotypical person, the more important something is, the more it sinks in. But for ADHD, if we don't ever hear it in the first place, it doesn't matter how important it is because we never heard it. That when we are relaxed, something can go wrong. When we are relaxed, something will go wrong. And so how do we correct against this? Being relaxed doesn't work for us, so we start to become paranoid. You cannot rely on your mind to remember. ADHD feels like waiting for an email that says you're in big trouble and everyone's mad at you. Hello, Dr. K. I really enjoy what you do, and I've watched many of your videos, particularly those about ADHD. As an autistic man with a lot of overlapping symptoms, I saw an Instagram post that read, ADHD feels like waiting for an email that says you're in big trouble and everyone is mad at you. That line hit me harder than I expected. It captures this constant low-level tension I carry, especially in professional settings. It rarely shows up in my personal life, thankfully. I feel secure with the people that I care about, but in contexts where composure matters more than content, I'm always waiting for a mistake with my name on it to surface. No matter how organized I try to be, there's this quiet dread that something slipped through the cracks. A form I missed, an unanswered email, and one day it'll all come crashing down. Part of me thinks this is just adulthood. Nobody points out small errors anymore. They just accumulate until they become something big. So I overcorrect with perfectionism, not because I need perfection, but because I can't tell what actually matters, okay? So let's talk a little bit about this. So oftentimes, people with ADHD grow up with this sense of constant dread. This kind of like baseline paranoia that something is going to pop up and it's going to screw me over and I'm going to be in big trouble and everyone's going to be disappointed in me. So where does this feeling come from and how do we protect against it? So the first is that we have to understand if we think this way, there's a good reason for it, okay? Now, I want y'all to understand what it's like to grow up with ADHD. So this was my constant state when I still have nightmares about, it's hilarious. Like I had a nightmare about 2 years ago that I forgot to turn in an assignment in high school. And since I forgot to turn in an assignment in high school, I didn't pass the class. And someone found out that I didn't pass the class, which means that I never graduated from high school. And since I never graduated from high school, that invalidated my college degree because I never finished high school, so college is invalid. Since I never went to college, that invalidated my medical degree, which invalidated my residency, which means that I'm no longer a psychiatrist. So this is like some weird, like, what is this? Like, what is going on? So here's what we got to understand. If you have ADHD, you grow up in a situation where you cannot rely on your mind. You cannot rely on your mind to remember. Now, technically, it's not remembering. Technically, it never goes in the first place. So let's remember that memory is stuff getting stored to the hard drive and being recalled to the hard drive. There's an attentional component where whether it ever gets written to the hard drive in the first place, and then it has to be pulled out. So a lot of people with ADHD think they have memory problems. They don't have memory problems. Memory is actually perfectly intact. It never gets written down in the hard drive in the first place. You weren't paying attention, so it didn't sink in. It's not that you forgot, it's that you never knew. Now, the practical result of this is that if you've got ADHD, you walk into school one day and you're not worried about anything, and then you discover that you forgot an assignment. So I was not worried, and I'm in trouble. A week later, I walk into school, not worried, get in trouble. Oh my God, I forgot I had a test. So over time, what happens with ADHD is we learn that when we are relaxed, something can go wrong. When we are relaxed, something will go wrong. And so how do we correct against this? Being relaxed doesn't work for us, so we start to become paranoid. We start to have this low level of dread always at the back of our mind because we have learned time and time and time again, when we are relaxed, things go wrong. Now, there are a couple of things that are different about people who don't have ADHD, people who are neurotypical. They too forget things. The problem is that they don't forget things nearly as much, and oftentimes the consequences aren't so severe. And I want y'all to really think about this for a second. So the problem with ADHD is it is a sensory attentional disorder. So for a neurotypical person, the more important something is, the more it sinks in. But for ADHD, if we don't ever hear it in the first place, it doesn't matter how important it is because we never heard it. So people who are neurotypical will also forget things. They won't pay attention 100% of the time, but they don't forget exams. They don't forget projects. They don't forget weddings, right? They don't forget like the big stuff. So some of that stuff is intact in neurotypical people. So everyone will forget, but it doesn't happen as often and the consequences are not as severe. Once the consequences are severe and it happens often enough, we turn on this dread mode, this paranoia mode, because we can't trust ourselves when we are relaxed. When we are relaxed, we make mistakes. So let's constantly be in a state of dread. There are a couple of other features here that are really important to understand. Two other neurodevelopmental aspects that are important. The first is emotional regulation. So people with ADHD experience emotions more rapidly and more intensely and have difficulty regulating their emotions. So a neurotypical person, when they feel a little bit of worry or paranoia, their ability to calm themselves down is naturally more robust than someone with ADHD. So some people have even hypothesized that there is an emotional dysregulation subtype of ADHD. So we think about attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's a subtype that's the H, right, that has hyperactivity or not. And then there's a third subtype of ADHD, attention deficit disorder with emotional dysregulation as a primary feature. So this is not so much about the dread being justified, but your ability to control the dread is going to be impaired. The last thing is impulsivity. So I don't know if this makes sense, but the idea that you forgot something is actually an impulse. So you're going about your day, and then there's an impulse. Oh my God, you forgot something. And you're like, wait, what did I forget? I didn't forget anything. Let me think. I can't think of anything. Goes away. Oh my God, you forgot something. So I don't know if this makes sense. It's not just that you learned that you can't trust yourself. It is that your brain is more vulnerable to repeated impulses of dread and has more difficulty regulating those repeated impulses of dread. So how do we fix this? This is where the reason I talk about these other neurodevelopmental aspects is if you go to treatment for ADHD, then hopefully they will help you with some of these things. So when I made the ADHD guide, I tried to list out a bunch of stuff that you can do, everything from organization and planning to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks to emotional regulation stuff. Okay, so all that stuff is laid out there. So the most important thing that I do with my patients is teaching them damage control. And what I'll do with them is we'll say they're worried about something going wrong. And so what we'll actually do is utilize a couple parts of the brain that are actually quite robust in ADHD. Number one is your sensory circuits. So oftentimes people with ADHD will have difficulty with like being overstimulated, will have difficulty with like, ARFID-like symptoms where certain textures really bother them, stuff like that. So sensory sensitivity is very high. We can use that to our advantage by giving ourselves sensory inputs. So literally what I'll tell my patients to do, and I think this works better on pen and paper than on a electronic device. There's certain neuroscience mechanisms for that as well. Anytime we write something, it slows down our thought process. We have to concentrate on that a little bit longer, which means it sinks in a little bit deeper. And the act of writing somehow commits things to memory a little bit better. There's just some connections there with just the way that our brain works. Okay. Speaking, by the way, so anytime we generate something from our mind, that thing gets locked into our head a little bit more. So if you have ideas in your head, but you speak them out loud, you're more likely to remember them. Okay. So what we'll do is I'll tell my patients, look, just grab a piece of paper and at the end of every day, write down what you forgot. Just write down what you forgot. You're going to forget stuff. Oh, you're dreading this stuff. You're going to forget things all the time, right? Just write it down. So we discover a couple of really important things. First is that sometimes they forget things, which is totally fine. Oftentimes their fear of forgetting things is actually far greater than the actual amount of stuff that they forget. Right? Once you're paranoid about something, the likelihood of it happening is lower than what you think it is. That's very common. Okay. So this does a couple of things. It actually is quite reassuring because now you're getting sensory input. Okay. I'm not screwing things up every day. That in and of itself is so soothing for your mind. But you will say, but Dr. K, what about the days that I forget something? Great. When you forget something, write down what you did to handle it. And this is what's really cool. Sometimes I'll have patients come into my office with ADHD and they say, oh my God, my life is so chaotic. Everything is chaotic and I hate it. I can never rest. I can never relax. And what I find when I talk to these people is that they do really well in chaos. If you take a chaotic environment, you drop a neurotypical person into it, you drop an ADHD person into it, the ADHD person will outperform the neurotypical person. The really interesting thing, what's really scary is you may be dreading that you make a mistake, but usually people with ADHD are really fast at managing them. So they're actually quite good at damage control. And why are you quite good at damage control? Why are you good at writing a paper really, really quickly? Because you forgot about it until 45 minutes before class. You sat down, you started writing furiously. You have so much more practice with chaos because you're forgetting things all the time and you're creating it all around you. So what I'll tell them to do is, even if you forget something, write down what you did to fix it and what that was like. And then we discover something really important, and this is what really gets the dread to disappear. The moment that you realize that you can handle things going wrong, you don't need to be paranoid about it anymore. You only need to be paranoid about problems that cannot be handled. This is why we have ICUs, intensive care units. What's the purpose of an ICU? ICUs are where we send the sickest patients. They have the highest ability for something to go wrong, but we have a better nursing to patient ratio. We have constant monitors. We have telemetry. We're doing checks all the time. There's a far larger team. There's a specifically trained, someone called an intensivist, a pulmonary critical care doctor who specializes in ICU care. The only reason you need to be paranoid is if your damage control capability is not good enough. Not if things go wrong. Things are absolutely going to go wrong. You will not remember everything. You will not pay attention to everything. Things will go wrong. Now, this isn't going to fix everything 100%, but if you do these things, if you actually start measuring how often you forget things, and you start really paying attention to how good you are at damage control, hopefully these two things will help you with this kind of paranoia. What questions do y'all have? Does this ADHD dread that comes from getting and punishment can stem from trauma as well? Absolutely. So this is what I want y'all to understand. So when a patient comes into my office with ADHD, they have some degree of depression or trauma until proven otherwise. So if you look at the causative relationship between mood disorders like major depressive disorder and ADHD, what you find is that there's a one-way street. If you have ADHD, the likelihood that you will develop depression is way higher. Compared to if you have depression, the likelihood that you develop ADHD is quite low, okay? So what this means is that original thing, the original dynamic of you not being able to trust yourself, the reason you get programmed is because it's traumatic. Let's understand what trauma is. Trauma is not a disorder. This is why trauma is so hard to treat. It's not a disorder. PTSD is a disorder. But generally speaking, a traumatic experience against the body is not a pathology. It's not something going wrong. Getting sick is damage to our body, but our body adapts. Our body's immune system actually improves after an infectious trauma. Does that make sense? I don't know what the word infectious trauma is. After an infection, let's just call it that. So the reason trauma is so hard to beat is because it is our body's adaptation mechanism. It's what it's wired to do. So I want y'all to think about this for a moment. If you didn't think that you forgot something and you forgot something, that's bad. And your body's like, how do we prevent this from happening again? And then you forget something again, and then you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize I forgot this. Now I'm screwed. So then our brain is sitting there and it's like, well, this guy relaxes and then forgets things. I've got an idea. How about we never let him relax? Because that's what the experience is. We're constantly in the jungle. There could be a tiger behind every tree and every bush. So we're going to be on a constant low level of alert. This dread in the back of the mind is absolutely trauma related in the sense that we have negative experiences that hurt us, activate our negative emotional circuitry. And anytime our negative emotional circuitry activates, we're talking about the amygdala and the limbic system. What's sitting right on top of it? The hippocampus, where we learn. So learning and negative experiences are very tightly tied together, right? If I meet an animal for the first time, if you guys have ever seen like a rescue dog or rescue cat that has had negative experiences with humans, they are adapting. Trauma is an adaptation, not a pathology in its most basic sense. It can become pathologic when the adaptation is maladaptive or happens too much, but great question. The Tiger Everywhere system, well said. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.